Hi, everyone. We're just going to let the attendees get on board. So if you'll just give us about 2 minutes or so, we're just going to make sure everybody gets a chance to get logged in and say hello to everyone. So welcome, and we will be back in 1 moment. I can see the numbers are still climbing, so people are just clicking on. So I don't want to do it too early, and people will miss the welcome. So just be patient for 1 minute or so, and we'll just see if we can get everybody on board and sort it out before we start the presentation. But thanks for joining us this evening, and hang tight. We'll be with you in just a moment. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome. My name is Reuben McMillan. I'm the innovator of projects, programs, and partnerships at the Canadian Childcare Federation, and I'm happy you could all join us here this evening for this great webinar about building foundational literacy skills in early childhood. And we're very pleased to be partnering with the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation this evening to bring you this great information and this really in-depth report that could help you improve your practice. So I'm going to turn it over to Coralie D'Souza, and then I will join you at the end of the webinar. So thank you very much. And just before you ask, the certificates will be sent out after the live event. So within probably 2 days at the most after the event. And I will also send you a follow-up email. But I'll chat with you more about that later. And over to you, Coralie. Welcome.
Hello, what a great turnout. My name is Coralie D'Souza, and I am the Vice President Programs here at the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation. I will be your moderator today in the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And I ask that you use the chat box in order to ask questions. I will group them together and ensure that I select the best panelists to answer them. And I'll turn things over to my colleague, Kaitlyn.
Thanks, Coralie. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Kaitlyn Parks. I'm a program specialist at the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation, and I did my PhD in developmental psychology at the University of Western Ontario, and I'll pass it over to Liz to introduce herself.
So hi everyone, nice to meet you all. So I'm also a program support specialist at the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation, also known as CCLF. I completed my PhD in developmental psychology and a postdoc in the School of Public Health Sciences at the University of Waterloo. So the session this evening was specifically designed for educators and childcare administrators who want to better understand children's literacy development and contribute to addressing Canada's literacy challenges. And you're also going to hear from Reuben and Paul from Social Research and Demonstration Corporation, or SRDC, who'll be presenting several recommendations on what it would take for every child in Canada to be learning the foundational literacy skills by the age of 5. And to give you all some context, SRDC is a nonprofit research organization that specializes in designing, testing, and evaluating new programs. And we at CCLF commissioned SRDC to create this comprehensive report. So before we get into the content, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we are working from in Toronto. The Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation's offices are located on lands that are covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Our work takes place on the traditional territory and the enduring home of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples across the country, now known as Canada. So we at CCLF are dedicated to improving access to educational opportunities by breaking down the barriers that hinder children's reading abilities. As Canada's leader in improving children's literacy, we introduce proven solutions within existing systems that help families raise better readers. Our programs are backed by research, so you can trust that they'll work within your practice and confidently support children's literacy development. Our signature program, Early Words for Healthcare Providers, is a great example of this approach. We train healthcare providers to have conversations with families about the importance of early literacy during routine appointments for children aged 0 to 5 years. And we have a similar opportunity with all of you who work with children in the early years. So on the slide here, we have a quote from Kim Dickinson's The Invisible Toolbox, that children don't just bring a backpack and a lunchbox to school. They bring an invisible toolbox filled with experiences that shape their ability to learn. And one key tool in that box is language. So the words they've heard, the stories they've been told, and the conversations they've had. These experiences form the foundation for learning to read, write, and communicate. However, not all children arrive with the same tools. Some children have been immersed in language-rich environments, while others may have not had that exact same exposure. And this is where you all play such a critical role. You have the opportunity to help fill those toolboxes to ensure every child, no matter their background, has the strong foundation they need to thrive when they reach formal schooling. And the best part is that this doesn't happen through flashcards or drills. It happens through play, through rich conversations, and through everyday moments that naturally build language and literacy skills. And today's discussion is about how we can make sure every child enters school with the best possible foundation, built through joyful, meaningful interactions in the early years. So let's go over the agenda for the webinar this evening. First, we will go over how early exploration is a natural pathway to literacy. Next, we're going to outline the literacy crisis we're experiencing in Canada. Then we will discuss the critical role you all play in children's development. Then Reuben and Paul will share the highlights from their report and several recommendations on what it would take for every child in Canada to be learning the foundational literacy skills by the age of 5. And finally, we will highlight opportunities for you to support children's literacy within your daily practice. So at CCLF, we deeply believe in play as a powerful tool for building language and literacy. In many early years environments across Canada, whether that's classrooms, daycares, or in the home, we already do a great job at embedding play into early learning. And that's something we should absolutely celebrate. Play is recognized as the foundation for early childhood education, and that's a huge step in the right direction. But within that play-based framework, there's small intentional shifts that we can make to further enrich the literacy experiences children have every single day. And the beauty of these strategies is that they don't require big changes on how you teach or engage with children. Instead, they're about noticing and maximizing the moments that already happen in your learning environments in ways that feel natural and joyful. I'd also like to share a quote from Literacy Learning for Infants, Toddlers, and Preschoolers, Key Practices for Educators, published by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. So they say that play encompasses knowledge building, problem solving, communicating, and collaborating. And you're never just letting children play. You're observing, guiding, and planning. And this quote serves as a powerful reminder that play isn't just a way for children to pass the time. It's an essential active process of learning and development. Every moment of play presents us with opportunities to observe, to guide, and to support children as they build important language and literacy skills. So now let's take a closer look at how play supports children's development in different areas. So through play, children engage in communication and storytelling, which helps expand their vocabulary of how language works and understanding of how language works in a variety of situations. Play also gives children a chance to explore concepts like counting, measurement, and prediction, deepening their understanding of basic math and science ideas. Play teaches children how to communicate, cooperate, and take turns, helping them build important social skills. And play also provides an opportunity for children to recognize and express different emotions. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Kaitlyn.
Great, thank you, Liz. So now let's look at why we're facing a literacy crisis and how our previous methods of teaching reading contributed to this issue. Before I dive in, I do want to clarify that we're going to be discussing the challenges we see in formal education, starting from kindergarten onward. However, it's important to touch on these issues because we typically begin noticing reading difficulties once children enter formal schooling, just because demands tend to increase there. The good news is the work you do in the early years plays a vital role in setting children up for success, and you can have a significant impact in helping to address these challenges long before they reach formal schooling. The state of literacy in Canada is a significant problem that needs to be addressed. Currently, 1 million children, Canadian children under the age of 15 have below grade level literacy skills. Based on a survey, 27% of children in Canada start formal school without the foundational skills they need to learn to read. And while this may not seem like a lot, it's 1 in 4 children, so it is actually quite significant. And oftentimes averages do mask the fact that we have some communities who do very well. And so depending on the communities we come from ourselves, we may think that this is not that big of an issue in Canada. However, it is, and it's key to remember that these numbers may not be representative of how low literacy rates actually are in some of our communities. So how did we get here? Well, reading is actually a relatively new thing for us humans. We've only been doing it for about 5,000 years. So it isn't like language where we can be exposed to really rich vocabulary and new words by adults and eventually learn how to speak and communicate. We all need to be explicitly taught how to read. And so it's an active process that requires help from adults. So it doesn't just happen. However, children haven't always been receiving this explicit instruction that they need, and that's part of how we got here. Now, in the past, a popular approach to teaching reading called balanced literacy was widely used. One part of this approach was the 3 cueing system, which is still used in some places today. Let's try the 3 cueing system the same way children in a balanced literacy classroom might when they come across a word they don't know, for example. So if you look here in the picture on the slide, one word is covered up except for the first letter there. Now, this is a common strategy used to help children figure out a word. So the first cue children might be asked is, what word makes sense in this context? So often they're encouraged to look at the picture for clues. So for example, looking at this image, a child might guess the word blue because that fits with the picture. The next cue is to ask, does the word sound right grammatically? Blue works here too. Finally, the child might be asked to look at the first letter, so B, and blue fits there too. So the thing is though, the word isn't actually blue, it's book. So did the child really read the word? Not really. In this case, they were guessing. And the 3 cueing system encourages this kind of guessing. So the problem with this approach is that it doesn't teach children the most reliable way to learn to read. Now, the best way is through systematically sounding out words. The 3 cueing system doesn't reflect how skilled readers approach reading, nor does it match how the brain actually learns to read. Another reason why balanced literacy approaches can be problematic is that learning to read isn't the same for every child. So it exists on a spectrum like the one that's shown here, with some finding it easy and others facing significant challenges. So for about 30% of students, reading comes naturally and doesn't require much specialized attention. However, for up to 70% of students, learning to read is much more difficult and heavily relies on the quality of the instruction they receive. And just as another gentle reminder, I am talking about when children enter the formal years of education here. Now, in response to the clear struggles children were facing in formal education, the Ontario Human Rights Commission, or OHRC, launched a public inquiry into how reading disabilities were being addressed in the province's public schools. And the inquiry revealed a widespread lack of evidence-based methods for teaching early reading skills. A few years later, the Right to Read report was released, which provided a roadmap for change, not just in Ontario, but for across Canada. And the Right to Read report includes 157 recommendations covering curriculum, early screening, interventions, and systemic issues, all aimed at addressing gaps in literacy education. And so basically it calls for a shift towards evidence and research-based practices to ensure that all students, including those with reading disabilities, can succeed. And ultimately it underscores that learning to read is not a privilege, but a basic and essential human right. Now, while this increase started in Ontario, it's important to note that reading disabilities are a national issue, and other provinces are already working on similar reforms. For example, New Brunswick, Alberta, Nova Scotia, and the Yukon First Nations School Board have already put these changes in place, starting as early as kindergarten. And these shifts are being introduced across provinces and territories, and we can expect them to continue to expand. So the recommendations from the OHRC are not just about what happens in formal schooling, they're also highly relevant to the early years. And this is where you as early years educators come in. So the earlier we support language and literacy development, the stronger children's foundations or toolboxes will be when they enter kindergarten. So remember, we talked about how we're never just letting children play. That's kind of what we mean here, is that being an intentional, active participant in a child's learning is super important in those early years. So purposeful interactions during play, story time, transitions, daily activities, snack time, all of those things are really key to laying those critical early literacy skills. So what are some things that you can do to help build those critical literacy skills? You're probably doing a lot of these already, but there are some really great ways that you can make these even more intentional. So the first is you can encourage language development by engaging children in meaningful conversations that involve multiple back and forth. Usually striving for 5 back and forths between an adult and a child is really great. You can help young children engage with text and images by asking a lot of open-ended questions about the stories you read together. You can show children how books work and introduce them to print by allowing them to even just turn the pages themselves and showing them the front and back covers of books. You can help children recognize the connections between sounds and letters and different sound patterns through playful activities and songs. And you can encourage early writing skills by allowing children to express themselves in a variety of ways. So I do want to note as well that these are not the things that children need to master before school, but rather things we can naturally encourage through play and conversation, and they can build these skills before they enter those years. So our workshops, which were created in consultation with early years educators, and we'll touch a little bit more on that later, they dive deeper into all of these concepts and provide practical ways to build these skills in your learning environments, whether that's daycare, at the home, at school, all of those types of settings. So I'll pass it over to Liz now.
So now let's get into the critical role you all play in developing children's foundational literacy skills. With nearly 2/3 of children in Canada enrolled in childcare, the role of the early years workforce in improving children's literacy outcomes cannot be overstated. You play a key role in the daily learning of millions of children and are a trusted source of guidance and information for families when it comes to their child's development. Unfortunately, early literacy often doesn't get enough attention in training programs for the early years educators. But there's a lot of research showing that the extra training in early literacy activities impacts educators' confidence in helping children develop language and literacy skills, leading to better outcomes for the children. So the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation, in partnership with the Canadian Childcare Federation, surveyed over 1,100 of you and your peers across Canada, and they found that only 38% felt confident in their ability to support early literacy development, and 25% felt that they had a strong understanding of early language and literacy milestones for children under 5. Additionally, they found that fewer than 50% reported that they are actively engaging the children that they work with in early literacy activities every day. And only 10% reported having participated in any professional development related to early literacy, compared with over 99% of respondents who would like to. And many of these findings were echoed by recent research from the University of Toronto on ECE's confidence and knowledge of early literacy instruction among both pre-service and in-service early years educators. So to help address these gaps in knowledge and confidence, it's essential that all of you receive science-aligned professional training and, most importantly, support for implementation on why early literacy practices are important to all domains of children's development, including language, social, emotional, and brain development. Have access to information and resources about early literacy and language development that can be incorporated easily into current programming, and also strategies for talking with families on how to support early literacy and language development at home. So now we're going to hand it over to Reuben and Paul from SRDC to review the recommendations of their report.
Thank you, Liz. So just to start off, I'll just present myself briefly. My name is Paul Lalonde, and I'm a Senior Research Associate with SRDC, and I'm here with my colleague Reuben Ford, as Liz mentioned. We were commissioned to answer the question, what would it take for every child in Canada to be learning foundational literacy skills by the age of 5? And so to answer that question, we looked at different aspects of early childhood education in Canada, including the systems and policies that define how early learning programs are delivered. We also explored the conditions that enable early learning for all children and the systemic challenges that need to be addressed in Canada's early childhood education and care system. Now, our research is clear that universal access to early literacy programs that are guided by a high-quality, evidence-based curriculum that foster pre-literacy learning, that are play-based, and that consider the child's social, emotional, physical, and economic well-being should be our goal. Now, what it would take to meet this goal is the subject of our recommendations, which I'll jump into right now. If you can go to the next slide, thank you. So our first recommendation emphasizes the need for Canada to increase the body of evidence on effective pre-literacy strategies for young children. Now, many of you on the call, in fact, probably all of you on the call are experts in this field. You know what works, you know how children react. What we need though is to support what you know through rigorous evidence, through testing, through implementing some of these new ideas, and to be able to demonstrate what is effective from what is not, and to ensure that all children have access to the best quality education in the early years. Now, what we are proposing is a new National Early Skills Center that could ensure the coordination and dissemination of new findings. Now, this structure would be ideal to provide funding for research projects that increase our understanding of child development, specifically within a Canadian context and across a variety of different communities in Canada. We'll go to the next recommendation. So the second recommendation builds off of the first. It looks at how we can mobilize this new knowledge into action. The worst thing that could happen is to create an institution that fosters new knowledge and that we don't use it or that we don't share it with others. So the first step that we see in this process is to develop a plan of action. And that report would advance decision-making in Canadian jurisdictions. And what it would do is detail what needs to be done and by whom to translate new knowledge into practice. We also believe that this could be supported by an information campaign that could convey the importance of pre-literacy in early years and how practical solutions can be implemented to reach all children. It may cost, but it's worth it, and this is why. Essentially, that would be the key message that we would want to convey through an information campaign. And finally, what we think is needed, and in fact is necessary, is a network of early literacy champions, of which probably all of you are already in your day-to-day lives. But essentially, this would be service providers, educators, community organizations, caregivers, families. Just to name a few, there are others, of course, that would be added to this. But these are people who care about early literacy, they care about early childhood education, and they are the people that we would want to bring together, mobilize them to support the dissemination of knowledge, and to put a bottom-up pressure on policymakers to implement changes that we feel are necessary in order to ensure that all children are able to learn foundational literacy skills. Next recommendation. So the third recommendation encourages revisions to early learning policy and frameworks across Canada to include specific references to the instruction of pre-literacy skills and the expected learning outcomes at every developmental stage. One of the findings from our research was that many of the early learning frameworks in Canada don't include explicit guidance on how to teach early literacy, and also what are the learning outcomes that should come from that practice. This is something that needs to be corrected to ensure that everyone that's involved in early childhood education understands what is needed, what needs to be taught, and what are the outcomes. So we encourage subnational governments to address the systemic recruitment, training, and retention challenges of ECE professionals, especially if we want to ensure the successful expansion of the system. And that's our next recommendation, which is focused on reaching all children. And this means expanding the availability of early learning programs, but also improving the quality of care and education in all environments where children learn. And to do this, what we are suggesting, what we're proposing is that early learning programs could be, or in fact should be, considered a right, something that is universally accessible to all children. And one of the ways that we could achieve this is by integrating early childhood education within the broader education system, recognizing early childhood education as education, and therefore something that should be available to all children as K-12 education is. We also recommend building stronger connections between early childhood education programs and pre-kindergarten and kindergarten programs to encourage successful transitions and to ensure that children are learning on a continuum. And finally, in order to achieve this proposed expansion, all levels of government will need to increase their investments in early childhood education and care and need to commit to making those investments. Now, we're definitely open to hearing what your recommendations might be, how we can improve the recommendations that we've put forward. And so we look forward to hearing any questions or comments you may have. I'll pass it back to you, Liz.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul. That was great. So now we're just going to shift gears and talk about some real opportunities for you to make a difference in supporting early literacy. So as part of our commitment to help you strengthen your practice, we're hosting 3 interactive workshops that are open to everyone here today. These workshops will be available virtually, so you can attend at your own convenience, and we'll walk you through when each one will be available and then how you can sign up. And if you complete all 3 workshops, you'll receive a certification from the Canadian Childcare Federation. So one thing that we do want to emphasize is that we've been incredibly intentional about collaborating with experts in the field to shape these workshops. Our advisory committee includes pedagogical mentors, early childhood educators from across Canada, adult learning specialists, child development experts, and Indigenous leaders who have guided us in creating something that is truly meaningful. So we're really grateful for their insights and expertise in making these workshops what they are today. Now, I do want to bring back these foundational literacy skills in early childhood that we showed you earlier in our talk, because our 3 workshops will help support all of these areas in practical ways. As you may recall, some of the most valuable skills children can develop in their early years include oral language, listening, comprehension, additionally understanding how books and print work, recognizing the connections between letters and their corresponding sounds, and practicing those early motor skills such as holding objects and eventually scribbling and writing are all critical to their development. Now, the first workshop we're offering will focus on building language and literacy skills during something I'm sure that you all are already doing, shared book reading or read alouds. Now, these workshops will be held on June 18th and June 3rd of this year. In this workshop, you'll learn practical techniques to make the most of your reading sessions with young children. So specifically, we'll explore how to encourage meaningful conversations during story time, make story time fun and engaging, support vocabulary development, respond effectively to children's comments and interactions, and build children's understandings of letters and words. In our second workshop, we'll explore how both creating and sharing stories, as well as acting them out, can nurture essential literacy skills. These workshops will take place on October 22nd of this year, and then again on March 22nd of this year. So we'll have two sessions that you can attend. If you can't attend the first one, you can attend the second. And through these activities, children not only expand their vocabulary and their understanding of story structure, but they'll also learn to validate their ideas and their voices, use their imaginations, express their emotions, develop self-regulation skills, and engage in positive interactions and teamwork with their peers. So all of those skills that Liz mentioned at the start that really help develop those early literacy skills. And then our final workshop is called Play with Purpose, which will take place on September 24th of this year, and then again on February 11th of next year. This session focuses on turning everyday play into meaningful opportunities for building language and literacy skills. So we've discussed, as we've discussed today, play naturally creates an ideal environment for developing these essential skills. So in this workshop, we'll explore strategies for maximizing the impact of children's play. For example, you'll learn how to talk about what the child is playing with. So for example, describing the toy's actions and appearances. And encourage back and forth exchanges. So for example, like I said previously, aiming for at least 5 turns in conversations between you and the child to strengthen those oral language and communication skills. So now that you've heard all about the exciting workshops we're offering, let's talk about how you can register to attend. So we have dropped a link, or we're going to be dropping a link in the chat. You can click on that and that will take you to our landing page that describes our workshops, the ones that I just talked about, and provides a link for you to easily sign up for the ones that you'd like to attend or the ones that you're available to attend. The same link actually is in the QR code that's shown on the slide here. So you can also use that to sign up for a workshop that's of interest to you. Just as a reminder though, if you complete all 3 workshops, you will receive a certification from the Canadian Childcare Federation.
So as we wrap up today's session, I want to leave you with some key messages. First and foremost, we know that early literacy experiences are essential. These early moments of engagement with books and language lay the foundation for lifelong learning and success. The skills children develop in their early years has a profound impact on their future academic and personal achievements. Second, there's a wealth of research that tells us exactly how we can best teach children to read. We know what works, and we have evidence-based strategies that we can implement in our learning environments to support every child's literacy journey. Third, you are at the heart of this work. You play a vital role in supporting children's foundational literacy skills. The interactions you have with children every day, whether it's during play, reading, or conversations, are crucial in building the skills they need to become successful readers. And finally, I want to remind you that you can enhance your early literacy practices through the workshops we've outlined today. These sessions are designed to give you practical, science-backed tools that will empower you to make a difference in the lives of children you work with. So thank you again for being a part of this conversation today, and we're so excited to continue supporting you on this journey of improving early literacy in your homes, daycares, classrooms, and communities. And together we can ensure that every child has the foundation they need to be successful. So now I'd like to open the floor to any questions you may have. If there's anything from today's session that you'd like further clarification on, or if you have any ideas to share, please feel free to ask. And if something comes to mind later, or if you'd like more information, we've included our email addresses on the screen as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out at any time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz, Kaitlyn, Paul, and Reuben. Looking in the chat, it doesn't look like there's any questions yet. But it
Actually,
could.
there is,
Oh.
Coralie. I think what's happening is maybe you're not seeing them because they're in the questions and I can see them. So what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to shift you to an organizer, and then you'll see what I see, and then hopefully you can access that. Sorry about that. I was just thinking I see a few questions there, but you can't see them. Okay.
No
Just
problem.
because of the roles of the thing. Okay, sorry about that. I'll fix that. Okay. There we go. There we go. Do you see your questions bar there now? Did it pop up for you there?
They did.
Okay. Sorry about that. That's where they all were.
Fabulous. So we've got, give me 1 second.
I can answer the one about the certificate while you're looking. While giving
Okay,
those a review.
yeah, why don't you tackle that one first?
Sure. So the certificates will be sent out within 2 days, within 48 hours of the live webinar event. And the webinar will also be posted to our YouTube channel. But unfortunately, if you don't watch the live webinar event, you won't be able to get that certificate. So it is the professional development certificate, but it's just for attending the live event. And also there will be a follow-up email being sent out that has some of the links and some of the references and resources that were mentioned during the webinar. And also there'll be a link to a brief survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you could fill out that survey. And that will come out in a separate email, because the certificate and the follow-up email will be, I believe, they come out in a separate email. So just be looking for those two, and make sure you look in your junk folders and spam folders, because sometimes they turn up in there, unfortunately.
Perfect. So the first question we have is from Jamie, and Jamie asks is if there is a plan to offer letters, LETRS, for early childhood educators across Canada. Is this early literacy training, science of reading aligned? She'd love, Jamie, he or she, would love to see this, or they, accessible for all ECEs, or maybe a grant or funding to support this. I can tackle the beginning of that. The 3 training programs or workshops that the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation is offering in collaboration with CCCF are completely free, and they are science aligned. They are aligned with the science of reading. What we've done is we've taken all of the research we've consolidated that applies to the early years and built these 3 modules. And my team, you're welcome to jump in if I've missed anything. Megan Edwards asks, where do the stats from the literacy stats stated come from? Kaitlyn and Liz, do you want to tackle that from the presentation?
Yeah, so the stats from that Kaitlyn presented at the beginning, I think that's the question that's being asked, right? Okay, let me just go to that slide. So those were taken from the children vulnerable in one or more areas of development from the EDI index. So we can add that to the email that Robin's going to send out, and we'll send the link to that. And then Kaitlyn, did you want to speak about the letters program at all?
No, I think Coralie covered it pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we also, on the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation website, this is not the first research we've commissioned. I encourage you to explore our website and sign up for our newsletter, because as we put out new research or have information that's relevant to this group, that's how you'll get it first. Jamie also asks, is there a plan to implement universal literacy screening in early childhood education programs? Early screening equals early intervention. I couldn't agree more. And it's happening in some provinces and territories, but not across the board yet. Reuben and Paul, do you want to elaborate on that one a little bit?
Well, I think our recommendations are to have universal access, to encourage those transition as early as possible between early child education and the school system, to be able to exactly do those things, to be able to detect whether there is a problem and to intervene as quickly as possible. But in terms of whether it's happening or how quickly it's happening, I don't think I can talk specifically about that. But I definitely do think that would be a great idea if provinces did get on board.
Excellent. And on from the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation perspective, we are very on board with early screening. And as we're having conversations with policymakers across the country, these are things that we're also encouraging and have been instrumental in advocating for it here in Ontario, where some of us reside. Mayhack asks, how do you involve a child with autism in activities as they are not focusing on activities? So we haven't yet developed programs specific to, or workshops specifically for children with autism, but Kaitlyn, can I throw to you to see if you can talk a little bit about how,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So like Coralie mentioned, our workshops don't necessarily focus on children who have different learning styles, but they aren't super prescriptive, so they can be used with children who learn differently. One of the things that our workshops focuses on is for example, making sure that you're encouraging children to say respond in the ways that they're so for example, if a child isn't very verbal, then making it so that they can respond with gestures or acting out stories or making noises and things like that. Those are all very much encouraged as well. So basically meeting that child where they're at and making sure that they can make the most out of it. And so for example, something that we were talking about with one of our board members the other day was how, say, a child really liked to talk about food or baking or something like that, but they didn't really like to respond to questions. And so it's like, okay, let's take that instance where they really like to talk about food and baking, and how can we ask questions about that? So at least that's still kind of happening. So that's the way that we're trying to address that within our workshops, is making things allowing children to respond in ways that are going to pull out their strengths so that they're still getting the most out of that.
Perfect. And along that same line, Tricia asks, will there be specific strategies aimed at educators working with infants and toddlers? Kaitlyn, you want to tackle that too?
Yeah, absolutely. So our workshops that we have focus on, we have tips for infants, toddlers, and then pre-K, kindergartners, preschoolers. So we have specific, those 5 areas that we talked about that we think are really foundational for children. We actually have specific tips that are based on those 3 age groups. So say if you just do work with infants, it would just be like, it will be, yeah, exactly. That's what we're talking about. So how can we get infants to talk and communicate or babble and things like that? Exploring early writing with infants during tummy time, putting things, across their midline. So they're maybe their favorite toy. So they're kind of like trying to reach for it, and we're developing those early motor skills. So it is based on infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. So yeah, it'll be, depending on what age of children you work with, it'll be relevant for all of you, hopefully.
Kim asks, is there a way I can sign up for all 3 workshops at once? I'm thinking it would be ideal for early on educators. We think so too. And we encourage you to reach out directly to, we've put up our email in the chat as well. In the past, we've done workshops specifically for an early on, so we can organize for something like that. And there's also, Robin's posted a link where all the webinars are or available. Yolanda, good question. How do we know when a child is ready to read? Liz and Kaitlyn, can I hand that one over to you?
Liz, do you want to take that one, or do you want what?
I think you can take it, yeah.
You want me to take it? Okay. Okay. So we believe that learning begins in utero, so and never stops is basically, which is similar to, I don't know if some of you have heard of Dan Worry, but that's kind of something that he says a lot. He just came out with a really great book that we've been reading, and that's one of the things that he says is that children are always ready to read. They come out ready to read, and so we should always be reading to children even before they can read themselves, even before they can talk, introducing them to new words, introducing them to a book, letting them play with it. You don't even need to read the whole thing. children will show interest in books if they're around. So having them at the same level that they're navigating is really great when they're little babies. But yeah, right at the beginning, they're ready. They come ready.
Beautiful. And we also believe that educators are already engaging in so many, parents and educators and caregivers are engaging in so many of these early literacy activities. And our hope through the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation is that we are helping to hone these strategies and approaches with a proven body of evidence. Patricia asks, hello, I'm an ECE teacher and I'm working with children, and she's been working with children for 17 years. How can we enhance the love of books in our children? Well, Patricia, I'm sure you're doing a lot of it already, and I encourage you to, I feel like we're a broken record, so sign up for our webinars. But the kinds of work that we're doing read alouds with your children, um, uh, and just the back and forth and making sure that you're having conversations and introducing new words and vocabulary through play is a way that your children will be prepare to read and love books.
I can elaborate a little bit on that if you'd like. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the workshops that I talked about, the Tell a Story Act It Out workshop, I'm not sure the age of children that you are working with, but one thing that's really great about it is and a key message that we definitely want to get across is children do not need to sit still during story time. That is not, actually, it can impede their comprehension if we have an expectation that they're just sitting still while we're reading to them. And so movement is super important. Dancing is super important, music, and our Tell a Story Act It Out session, that's part of it, is having the child create the story, and then later as a group, all of the children acting it out together and playing different parts. It's so fun. Kids love it. It's evidence-based still too. So it doesn't need to be boring. It can be fun in that way too. And so that's kind of what this workshop is focusing on, is how movement can actually really enrich language and literacy.
Perfect. What are some tips? Christina asks, what are some tips for frustrated children who are learning to print letters and read? Kaitlyn or Liz, would you happen to have any?
I don't think I have any specific tips. I think what we really try to focus on in our workshops is that strengths-based approach. So just really seeing what children are interested in doing well at. So perhaps if maybe getting them to read specific words is really frustrating, maybe we can try a story that is in an interest that they find really interesting. So if they like trucks, we find a story about trucks and maybe try to engage them in that because they might be more familiar with the vocabulary of different like construction trucks. For some reason, 4-year-olds always know what an excavator is, and I have no idea what one is, but they are experts in these things. Yeah, so I think that would be my specific suggestion. Kaitlyn, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Can you just say the question again? Sorry, Coralie, I can't see it.
Problem. The question was around recommendations on how to encourage children that are frustrated by reading or learning to print.
Learning to print. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I think what Liz said is great, but I also think maybe to add to that, I think that again, going back to, we don't necessarily need them maybe at a table with a piece of paper and like a pen. Maybe we can go outside in the snow. Maybe we can go to the sand table. Maybe we can practice print in more exciting ways. That is still going to give the child exposure to that. And I think with print too, maybe it does come down to, like, you know, having that child tell a story, or like Liz was saying, making it exciting, and what is it that that child really likes, and maybe that comes down to also asking like their caregivers what that is, and how can I harness that and integrate that into getting this child to learn these essential skills.
A fun little game that I've seen, I learned from my preschooler's educator, was a guessing game where you have the child close their eyes and you write a letter on their palm, like it's a piece of paper, and they guess what letter, or you feel it out and you tell them what letter, and that is he, my son can tell you what letters make up his name now, and that's super exciting. That's hot tip. Some other great questions. Give me one sec. Oh, here's a great one, because I know the team will have them. Is there a book related to this topic that you recommend as a must read for ECEs? Liz, you want to go first?
There's a lot of different books I think that could be really great. The book that we showed on the slide, The Invisible Toolbox, is an excellent book. There's also Strive for Five by Sonia Cabell. That's an excellent book. That NAEYC book that we mentioned earlier, Literacy Learning for Infants, Toddlers, and Preschoolers, is also an excellent resource that we based a lot of our materials off of. Yeah, I think those are really accessible. Those three are also very accessible books. They're not academic, written like text heavy. They're very realistic with practical tips on how to engage children.
What I can also, we can provide Robin with with a reading list.
Yes.
Yeah, and I encourage you to follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, on whatever social medium you enjoy. And I will make sure that in the next week or so, we post a reading list of some of our favorite books. And sorry, give me a second. I was getting too into the answers that I wasn't looking at the questions. Are there funding opportunities to support ongoing literacy programs? Asks Julie. And I can speak on behalf of the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation. So we strive to make all of our programs, all of our workshops for educators completely free. We are, as I said, through CCCF, they'll be available, but we're also working with ECE associations in different provinces and territories and building those relationships. And those are, we're not charging anything for those. Sometimes the association will charge a nominal fee just to ensure people show up for them. But our goal is to make these available and free. And one of the exciting things we're working on is a pilot with the YMCA of Southwestern Ontario, where ECEs, educators in the YMCA there are being paid. This is all being done during paid leave time. And the hope is that these workshops will be rolled out across YMCAs nationally in the next couple of years. So very exciting. And I do know that from conversations we've had in some provinces and territories, like PEI and Newfoundland, that there are grants available to be able to bring training into your centers. Here's a question that I don't know the answer to, and maybe somebody here will. Does sign language help developing literacy in infants? Asks Priya Singh. Liz or Kaitlyn, do you happen to know?
I think it kind of depends on what sign language you're talking about. If you're talking about baby sign versus like ASL, for instance, baby signs just are signs for like particular objects like more or milk, or all done is a very popular one that I've seen, whereas ASL is itself a language with a full grammatical structure and vocabulary. So I it's a little, I don't think there's really like a comparable difference. Raising a child to learn like ASL along with another, like a spoken language, that's raising a bilingual child. But baby sign, I think, is just a little different. It might just help with that expressive vocabulary for the child, because they themselves can't communicate everything. They understand a lot of what they say, but they can't say what they want to say. So I think they're just two very different things.
Perfect. We're about 5 minutes from being done, and I wanted to tackle one last question, and any other questions you may have, you're welcome to email us and we'll or get in touch with us. The last question we have is a good one around using multiple languages. Does it cause difficulty for children in acquiring these foundational literacy skills? Liz and Kaitlyn? Liz.
I would say, Kaitlyn can respond too, but I think the short answer is no. Kaitlyn, do you want to expand on that?
No, not at all. Like, absolutely not. It's
No.
actually really great. It's great to have the, like, with multilingual, yeah, it's not a hindrance at all. And I think that that's a really important message that we have in our programming and things like that too. It seems to be, it's a question that I think a lot of people get that are looking at literacy. And yeah, the very short answer is no. Children can do something called translanguaging, which is when they might go back and forth between two languages when they're speaking, and that's absolutely okay. That doesn't hinder their language and literacy development. The only important thing to know as an educator is that can happen, and maybe they might exhibit phonetic patterns that are totally normal. So to not misrepresent that as an error when they're like sounding something out. But yeah, perfectly okay for them to combine two languages. And actually, Paul might even have something. Paul, I think you might even be able to touch on this a little bit. I don't know.
Well, as a bilingual person, you mean, or like
yeah, your children. Your children.
Yeah, my children are learning English now, but they are mostly unilingual right now. We're struggling with that. But it is true. I know I grew up in Ontario as a francophone, and I was exposed to English, and we had an expression growing up that you learned French, but you caught English just by exposure and just by learning it. And so we would learn the language not necessarily through systematic instruction, but just through exposure and through our interactions. And just that exposure meant that we would learn the language like any other English child would learn it as well. So it didn't cause any problems with language development in any other aspects. There is a risk though, and in some previous studies that looked at this. One of the issues in French Canada outside of Quebec is the fact that because of assimilation, because there's so much exposure to English, that Francophone children aren't developing their mother tongue as well. But that's more of an issue of exposure once again, and whether or not they have opportunities to use their mother tongue on a daily basis, and whether or not they're actually going to be able to master that mother tongue. In various contexts. And there have been studies that have shown that subtractive bilingualism is a thing where you replace an existing word in your mother tongue by a new word in your second language. Anyways, that is an impact that can happen, but in terms of actually developing your language skills, developing your capacity to learn multiple language, I can tell you that having seen children who've learned 3-4 different languages, especially at a birthday party we had a couple of weeks ago, where every single child spoke 3 different languages fluently. I can tell you not one of them had any problems in school or had any problem learning any language or reading or anything like that. It was pretty exceptional to see, actually.
Quickly, thanks so much. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
In our review of the literature as well, there are no evidence of problems arising from learning multiple languages. Just to echo the point, I know we've drawn on personal experience here, but I think the literature is pretty clear on that too.
just really quickly too, I just kind of wanted to say, just in terms of like a practical application standpoint too, if a child is speaking in another language to you as an early years educator, instead of correcting them, one of the great things that you can do is just ask them what the word they're saying means. And that's a really great way to just continue with that questioning and get them involved and still having them learning. So I just wanted to say that to close off. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to turn things over to Robin, and thank you everybody for participating. What a great turnout.
Yes, that was great. Thanks so much. Thanks, Corley. So I think you can see the slide that I've put up there about the Canadian Childcare Federation. And as Corley mentioned, we're pleased to be presenting these workshops, these webinars with the Canadian Children's Literacy Foundation. And in case some of you aren't aware, the Canadian Childcare Federation is the leading national voice for the early learning and care workforce. We work in partnership with other national organizations such as CCLF and our provincial territorial affiliates to build relationships with government policymakers, conduct necessary research and national campaigns that influence policy at the federal, provincial, and territorial level. We lead campaigns, we listen to voices, and provide accurate childcare information that supports early learning advocates from coast to coast to coast. And of course, with an election looming, you can go to our website. I think they're going to be posted soon. We're going to have things to help you out with your election choices, perhaps, and maybe some advocacy work that you might like to do on behalf of early learning and childcare and our Canada-wide plan. So there'll be information on our website about that. As well, we will have a follow-up email, as I mentioned, and there'll be links to resources and evaluation survey and that type of thing in there. We will also mention some of our other upcoming webinars. So there were a few webinars mentioned within the presentation that are linked with the CCLF partnership work that we're doing, the shared book reading. We also have another one coming up before that on April 16th, and it's all about our family childcare training course. And you can see on our slide that we have actually 3 online courses that we've developed and we will be offering. And our family childcare training will be launched May 1st, and then we have a course in gender diversity and gender diversity in early childhood education, which will be launched next. And then after that, we will be doing another launch of our online outdoor play course, which has always proved to be quite popular. And if you're a Canadian Childcare Federation member, you get those courses at a discount. So that's always good to know. And of course, we have free webinars as we're on right now. This is another benefit of the work that we do. So we're happy to be offering more free webinars. We have, as well as April 16th on family childcare training, we're also doing one on May 28th about developmentally responsive and informed practice. And that one's going to be a little bit different. We're doing it more of a game show format. So I'm kind of curious how this is going to work out. So I hope you can join us for that. And then on June 18th, as was mentioned, we're doing a shared book reading with CCLF. We're going to be doing a webinar about that. So I think without further ado, I'm going to let everybody get back to their evenings. And thank you so much, all my friends at CCLF, for coming on tonight and giving us that great foundational view of the report that you've done, the research that you've done. It's really great to have this as a base document and things that we can go forward from. It's invaluable to our sector. So thank you very much for all the work you're doing. And good night from Ottawa. I forgot to mention that I'm here in Ottawa on the unceded land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. So I'm happy to be talking to you from the nation's capital tonight and getting excited for the elections. So let's hope that all goes well. So have a wonderful evening, and we will be talking to you soon. Thanks for joining us.
How do I, oh.
Just going to close off the webinar. Sorry, hang on a second. Nice to do that. Where is that gone now? Oh my goodness, I can't find where it's gone now. I've lost my dashboard. Sorry, well, people are leaving as we're talking. That's okay. Just don't say anything personal because we're still on. Sorry about that. I don't know where it's gone now. And oh, there we go. I'm sorry. Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us.